It's June 5th, 1944, southern England. The air is thick with tension, not just with the dampness of the coming storm, but with the low, constant hum of engines. Across dozens of airfields, the night sky throbs with the sound of thousands of aircraft, their engines warming up for the most critical mission of the Second World War. Inside these planes, in the dim, cramped fuselages of C-47 transport aircraft, sit thousands of paratroopers. Young men from America, Britain, and Canada, their faces painted for camouflage, their equipment heavy on their shoulders. They sit in silence, lost in their own thoughts, waiting for the single order that will send them hurtling into the darkness over occupied France and change the course of history forever. In one of those planes, Private James McAllister of the legendary 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, checks the straps of his parachute for the 10th time. His hands, though calloused from months of grueling training, tremble just slightly. He can feel the thrum of the engines through the metal floor, a vibration that seems to travel right up into his chest. The air is a strange cocktail of smells: aviation fuel, damp wool uniforms, sweat, and the electric scent of pure, unadulterated anticipation. Outside, a fine English rain begins to fall, blurring the dim runway lights and making the world beyond the small porthole window seem distant and surreal. Just a few miles away, in a command room wallpapered with maps, the architect of this immense operation, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, stands grim-faced. The map before him shows the northern coast of France. 5 small pins mark 5 beaches, names that will soon be burned into the memory of the world: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. His staff officers, a collection of the best military minds the Allies have, surround him. The air in this room is just as tense as in the transport planes, but here it's a silent, intellectual pressure. Every man in the room understands the colossal gamble they are about to take. The lives of hundreds of thousands of men, the future of Europe, it all rests on this moment. After a long, heavy silence, Eisenhower's voice cuts through the tension. It's steady, but weighed down by the gravity of his decision. "Okay," he says with a simple finality. "Let's go." With those 3 words, Operation Overlord, the largest and most complex amphibious invasion in human history, is officially set in motion. But the success of this monumental undertaking doesn't just hinge on overwhelming force. It depends on something far more subtle, a weapon of the mind. For months leading up to this night, Allied intelligence had been weaving a masterful web of lies, a grand deception codenamed Operation Fortitude. The singular goal was to fool Adolf Hitler and the German High Command, to convince them that the main Allied invasion wouldn't target the beaches of Normandy, but would instead strike at the Pas de Calais, the closest point between England and France, over 200 kilometers to the northeast. This wasn't just a simple rumor campaign. It was a full-scale phantom invasion force. Across the fields of Kent and Sussex, a ghost army had been assembled. From the air, German reconnaissance planes would see rows upon rows of tanks, vast airfields crowded with fighter planes, and depots overflowing with military trucks. But up close, these instruments of war were nothing but rubber, wood, and canvas. Inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, and dummy landing craft were strategically placed to create the illusion of a massive army group. This phantom force, the first U.S. Army group, even had a celebrity commander, the fearsome General George S. Patton, a man the Germans both respected and feared. His presence in southeast England was the keystone of the entire charade. The deception went even deeper. A complex network of dummy radio transmissions filled the airwaves, simulating the everyday communications of an army preparing to invade. Thousands of fake messages, from logistical requests to soldiers' chatter, were broadcast, all designed to be intercepted by the Germans. And what about German spies in Britain? The British had them covered. Under a program codenamed the Double Cross System, every single German agent operating in the UK had been captured and turned. These double agents were now feeding a steady stream of misinformation back to their handlers in Berlin, each report carefully crafted to reinforce the belief that Calais was the real target. The deception was so complete, so multi-layered, that the Germans didn't just believe it, they were absolutely certain of it. Back on the airfield, As Private McAllister and his fellow paratroopers prepare for takeoff, they are completely unaware of this grand, invisible battle of wits being fought on their behalf. The night is alive with the symphony of war. The deafening roar of thousands of aircraft engines, the metallic clatter of rifles and ammunition, and the quiet murmured prayers of men facing their own mortality. Men who packed not just their weapons and rations, but small, cherished photographs of wives, sweethearts, and children, knowing they might never see them again. McAllister does a final check of his gear, his M1 rifle, his trench knife, his K-rations, a compass, and tucked safely in his breast pocket, the worn photo of his family back in Ohio. He catches the eye of the jump master, the sergeant standing by the cargo door, and gives a firm nod. The red light above the door flicks on, bathing the cabin in an eerie, hellish glow. The final signal. The engines scream to their peak, and the plane lurches forward, then lifts powerfully into the dark, turbulent sky. McAllister presses his face against the small, round window. Through the glass, he sees the coast of England fall away, and below, the black, churning sea of the Channel. In the distance, flashes of lightning illuminate the clouds of the storm front they are flying directly into. Somewhere beyond that storm, beyond the rain and the wind, lies Normandy, fortified, waiting, and defended by an enemy who has had 4 years to prepare for this day, and hundreds of miles away from the real action, in a heavily guarded bunker in northern France. The man tasked with defending the coastline, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, is confident. He believes the weather is too poor for an invasion, and besides, he is certain that when the invasion does come, it will be at Calais. The deception has worked beyond the Allies' wildest dreams. In fact, Rommel is so confident that he has left his post. He is on his way to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday, taking a brief, fatal leave from the front. At 11:45 p.m., the first of the Allied planes reach the French coast. The red lights turn green. Jumpmasters shout, "Go, go, go!" And out into the howling wind and darkness the paratroopers leap. The invasion of Europe has begun, not with the thunderous roar of a naval bombardment, but with the silent, ghostly descent of men through the night sky, their parachutes blossoming like pale flowers over enemy territory. In just a few short hours, as the sun rises over the Normandy coast, the fate of the free world will be decided on 5 stretches of sand. The longest day has begun. June 6, 1944, 5:23 a.m. As the first light of dawn crept across the English Channel, it revealed a sight the world had never seen before and will likely never see again. From horizon to horizon, the sea was filled with the might of the Allied Armada. Over 5,000 ships of every kind, battleships, destroyers, landing craft, and transport vessels. The ocean itself seemed alive, a single colossal organism pulsing with movement and purpose. On board these ships were men from every corner of the Allied world, Americans, British, Canadians, Poles, Free French, and more, all united by a singular monumental cause to take back Europe from the grip of tyranny. They were the tip of the spear, the generation that would pay the price for freedom. On the deck of the USS Samuel Chase, waves crashed violently against the hull. Private James McAllister, soaked to the bone from the sea spray, tightened his grip on his rifle. The cold wind whipped across his face as officers barked final, urgent orders. In the distance, the French coastline slowly emerged from the morning haze. Gray cliffs, menacing steel obstacles, and plumes of smoke rising from German defenses. The Atlantic Wall, a fortress said to be impenetrable. Above them, Allied bombers thundered overhead, a relentless stream of silver birds unleashing waves of fire and steel upon the concrete bunkers of Hitler's coastal defenses. The ground trembled even miles out at sea. The invasion had begun. But war is never as simple as the plans drawn on a map. Unpredictable and powerful forces were already at play. Strong winds and heavy tides scattered the landing craft, throwing meticulously organized units into disarray. Men who were supposed to land together found themselves separated by miles, alone and disoriented in the chaos. At a stretch of sand codenamed Omaha Beach, the reality of the fight hit with brutal force. The German defenses were far stronger than intelligence had predicted. As the ramps of the landing craft dropped, a storm of lead erupted. Mortars and machine guns ripped through the first waves of soldiers as they struggled to disembark. Men fell into the surf, their bodies swept away by the current as the sea turned red with the tide. Sergeant Bill Carter of the legendary 1st Infantry Division screamed over the deafening roar of battle. "Move! Get off the beach! If you stay here, you're dead!" His men, those who were still standing, crawled through the sand and tangled barbed wire, clinging desperately to any sliver of cover they could find. The beach was a kill zone, and the only hope for survival was to push forward into the jaws of death. McAllister's landing craft, battered by the waves, veered slightly off its intended course. It crashed into the shallows near a different beach, Utah. The moment the ramp dropped, chaos exploded. Gunfire cracked from hidden bunkers, and shells screamed down from the sky, sending geysers of seawater and mud erupting around them. "Go! Go! Go!" yelled the lieutenant, his voice barely audible above the din. McAllister plunged into the icy water, the immense weight of his gear threatening to drag him under. He kicked free, adrenaline surging through him, and staggered toward the beach. Around him, men fell, men shouted, men fought with every ounce of their being just to stay alive. The air was thick with smoke, cordite, and the metallic smell of blood. Miles away, the battle raged on other fronts. The British 50th Infantry Division stormed Gold Beach under a relentless hail of fire, supported by specialized tanks that barely made it ashore through the churning surf. At Juno Beach, Canadian troops faced a wall of brutal machine gun fire. They pushed forward with astonishing courage, suffering heavy casualties but ultimately breaking through the German line and beginning their advance inland. And on Sword Beach, a truly surreal scene unfolded. British commandos, led by the legendary and eccentric Lord Lovett, advanced inland to the sound of bagpipes. His personal piper played amidst the smoke and explosions, a haunting melody that was a bizarre mix of unbelievable courage and sheer madness. It was a defiant symbol of the human spirit refusing to be broken, even in the heart of hell. Meanwhile, in the skies above Normandy, another battle was being fought. Paratroopers of the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, dropped during the night, were still fighting to regroup. Many had been scattered miles from their intended drop zones. Some landed in flooded fields, dragged down by their equipment. Others found themselves dropped directly behind German lines, surrounded and outnumbered. Yet despite the confusion and isolation, these men did not waver. Small groups began to form, improvising and adapting. They cut enemy communication lines, ambushed German patrols, and seized strategically vital bridges. These small, isolated actions, often carried out by just a handful of men, would prove absolutely critical to the success of the landings, sowing confusion among the enemy and preventing reinforcements from reaching the beaches. By mid-morning, the beaches were a chaotic, hellish landscape of smoke, fire, and incredible courage. Engineers worked frantically under relentless shellfire to clear mines and obstacles, creating paths for the men and machines pouring ashore. Medics, with no thought for their own safety, moved through the carnage, treating the wounded amidst the constant danger. Out at sea, the massive warships of the Allied fleet provided crucial covering fire. Their huge guns roared, sending shells whistling overhead to pound enemy positions further inland, suppressing fortifications that were pinning down the infantry. Gradually, painfully, the tide of the battle began to turn. The sheer weight of men and material, combined with unimaginable acts of individual bravery, started to overwhelm the defenders. The Allies were pushing inland. At 10:00 a.m., aboard the command ship Augusta, General Omar Bradley received the words he had been desperately waiting for. A simple but historic message crackled over the radio. Troops were gaining ground at Utah and Gold. Even at Omaha, despite the catastrophic losses, small groups of soldiers were beginning to breach the defenses. The beaches are secure. Far inland, the German high command was still paralyzed by confusion. The elaborate deception campaign, Operation Fortitude, had worked perfectly. Berlin remained convinced that the Normandy attack was merely a diversion. The bulk of their powerful panzer divisions stayed stationed near Calais, waiting for a main invasion that would never come. This strategic blunder gave the Allies the precious window of time they needed to establish their foothold. As the smoke began to clear and the sun climbed higher over the blood-soaked sand, Private McAllister collapsed behind a dune, his chest heaving, his rifle still clutched in his hands. Around him lay the shattered remnants of the morning's battle, men alive and dead, their faces pale with exhaustion, fear, and a dawning sense of relief. He looked back toward the sea, where an endless line of ships continued to pour men and machines onto the beach, a testament to the immense power that had been unleashed. They had done it. Against all odds, they had breached the fortress. They were on French soil. The Great Crusade, the liberation of Europe, had begun. By midday on June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy were secured, but the cost was staggering. Smoke drifted across a coastline forever changed, mingling with the cries of the wounded and the distant thunder of artillery. The once pristine shores were now a graveyard of war, burning vehicles, shattered landing craft, and the bodies of men who had paid the ultimate price for freedom. Private James McAllister, a young soldier in the thick of it, sat with his back against a cold steel obstacle, his breath coming in ragged gasps as his unit regrouped. All around him, engineers worked tirelessly, clearing paths through the formidable beach defenses. The enemy's fortress, the much-feared Atlantic Wall, had proven far from invincible, but it had exacted a brutal toll. Even as they regrouped, sniper fire and hidden machine guns harassed the troops from the dunes. "Keep moving. We have to link up with the paratroopers inland," shouted his platoon leader. The order cut through the exhaustion. McAllister pushed himself up, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, and followed the others through the acrid smoke. Every single step inland was a new battle. They fought across treacherous minefields, through the dense, thorny hedgerows of the bocage, and down narrow farm lanes that had been turned into deadly killing zones by an entrenched enemy. Yet the Allies pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that every meter gained was one step closer to breaking Hitler's iron grip on Western Europe. Meanwhile, behind the front lines, the true genius of Operation Fortitude, the Grand Deception Plan, was reaching its crescendo. The German High Command, completely hoodwinked, still believed the main invasion was yet to come, aimed at the Pas de Calais. This intricate illusion, woven from fake radio chatter, clever double agents, and entire phantom armies, continued to hold. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the German commander in the West, remained uncertain of the true scale of the Normandy attack. Crucially, he refused to release his powerful panzer reinforcements to counter the landings. Even Adolf Hitler, awoken late and thoroughly confused by the conflicting reports, insisted that Normandy was merely a diversion. This fatal miscalculation had enormous consequences. The German 15th Army, the strongest defensive force in all of northern France, remained idle at Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. This left the defenders of Normandy to fight alone and severely outnumbered. It was this critical delay, born from deception, that gave the Allies the priceless time they so desperately needed to establish and solidify their beachhead. By the afternoon, Allied command posts were buzzing with frenetic activity. In the British sector, General Bernard Montgomery coordinated the advance toward the vital city of Caen. In the American sector, General Omar Bradley pushed his forces to capture key crossroads leading deeper into France. From the sea, the massive guns of the Allied fleet continued to pound German fortifications, their relentless barrage creating rolling clouds of smoke that darkened the afternoon sky. Amidst the large-scale chaos of battle, it was the individual acts of heroism that truly defined the day. On the blood-soaked sands of Omaha Beach, soldiers used their bare hands and rifle butts to claw out makeshift trenches under a hail of enemy fire. Engineers, displaying unbelievable courage, risked their lives disarming mines and cutting through barbed wire to open routes for the tanks waiting offshore. Medics, unarmed and exposed, weaved through fields of fire to carry the wounded to safety, refusing to leave a single man behind. The courage on display was relentless, almost defiant in the face of such horror. As Private McAllister's unit reached a small village just outside Vierville-sur-Mer, they were met with fierce resistance from a well-hidden German machine gun nest. The air exploded as bullets tore through stone walls and kicked up fountains of dirt. "We're pinned down!" someone yelled. The men dove for whatever cover they could find. McAllister, his face pressed into the mud, crawled towards a fallen comrade. He grabbed a grenade from the soldier's webbing, pulled the pin, and with a surge of adrenaline, hurled it towards the enemy position. The explosion shattered the air, followed by a sudden deafening silence. The surviving Germans scrambled out of their nest and fled into the dense hedgerows. The Americans pushed on. By sunset, a fragile but definite foothold had been secured across all 5 invasion beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. The Allies had landed nearly 156,000 men in a single day. Though many of the day's primary objectives remained unmet, the invasion was no longer in doubt. They were on French soil, and they were here to stay. Far behind enemy lines, a different kind of army was stirring. Members of the French resistance, hidden in the shadows for years, emerged from hiding. They were guided by coded messages broadcast over the BBC, cryptic phrases like "Les sanglots longs des violons de l'automne," the long sobs of the autumn violins. This was the signal they had waited 4 long years for. Sabotage operations erupted across the French countryside. Railway lines were blown, communication cables were cut, and German convoys were ambushed in the dead of night. The people of France were rising up to join their liberators. As darkness finally settled over Normandy once more, the deafening sounds of battle began to fade into a low, persistent rumble. Fires burned in the distance, flickering like a string of torches along the horizon. McAllister found a moment of rest, sitting beside a ruined farmhouse, sharing a canteen of water with another soldier. "We made it," he whispered, the disbelief clear in his voice. They had survived. They had lived through the longest day. But as they looked out over the darkened fields of Normandy, they knew that the road ahead, the road to Caen, to Paris, and ultimately to Berlin, was only just beginning. The fight for Europe's freedom had just begun. As the sun rose on June 7, 1944, a new day dawned not just over Normandy, but over the very course of history. The chaos of D-Day had begun to recede, replaced by the relentless, thrumming pulse of a massive invasion force. The beaches, once theaters of unimaginable violence, were now the beating heart of the Allied advance. A constant, seemingly endless stream of men, vehicles, and supplies poured ashore. Bulldozers, like mechanical beasts, clawed roads out of the churned-up earth. Medics worked tirelessly, tending to the wounded, their white armbands a stark contrast to the mud and blood. Engineers, displaying incredible ingenuity, were already constructing makeshift piers from the wreckage of sunken ships. What had been a desperate gamble was transforming into a formidable army of occupation, an army poised to push deep into enemy territory. Among the thousands driving inland was Private James McAllister. He and his unit were tasked with advancing towards the strategic town of Carentan. But this was not the open field warfare they had trained for. This was Normandy, and Normandy had its own rules. The landscape was a labyrinth of hedgerows, or bocage as the French called them. These ancient earthen mounds topped with thick, tangled hedges were deceptive. They turned every field into a natural fortress, every pasture into a potential killing ground. German troops, including hardened remnants of the 302nd Infantry Division, used this terrain to their advantage, fighting with a ferocious tenacity. Machine gun fire ripped through the dense foliage, its deadly chatter echoing across the countryside. Mortar shells rained down, erupting in geysers of soil and smoke. The fighting was close, terrifyingly personal, and brutally intimate. Yet, above this brutal ground war, the Allies held absolute dominion. Squadrons of Spitfires and Thunderbolts patrolled the skies, the undisputed kings of the air. They were the hunters, and German convoys were their prey. With devastating strafing runs, they shredded enemy supply lines and cut off reinforcements before they could even reach the front. Far out at sea, the colossal guns of the Royal Navy continued their relentless bombardment, their shells screaming overhead to hammer German positions miles inland. With every passing hour, the Allied grip on Normandy tightened, like a steel fist closing around the coast. Of course, the reality on the ground was far from perfect. The sheer scale of the operation created immense logistical challenges. Supply bottlenecks threatened to choke the advance. Communication lines were fragile, often breaking down in the heat of battle. and the Germans, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, fought back with the desperation of cornered animals. Near the city of Caen, the British advance was ground to a near halt. They faced the elite 12th SS Panzer Division, the Hitlerjugend, a unit comprised of young but fanatically loyal soldiers. The fighting was so intense that villages changed hands multiple times in a single day. The idyllic French countryside was scarred by war. Fields burned, sending thick columns of black smoke into the air, grim signals of the battle raging below. But while the soldiers on the ground fought for every inch of French soil, another silent battle was being won hundreds of miles away. Operation Fortitude, the masterful deception campaign, was still working its magic. In his headquarters in Berlin, Adolf Hitler remained stubbornly convinced that the Normandy landings were merely a diversion. His intelligence officers, fed a steady diet of misinformation by the Allies, continued to report the existence of a phantom army massing in southeast England, poised to strike at the Pas de Calais. Even as credible reports poured in describing the massive scale of the Normandy invasion, Hitler dismissed them. He believed it was all an elaborate feint, a trick to draw his forces away from the real invasion site. This strategic blindness was one of the greatest Allied assets. It kept the German 15th Army, their most powerful armored force in the region, completely idle. For almost 2 critical weeks, these panzer divisions sat in the north, waiting for an attack that would never come. By the time the German high command finally realized the catastrophic scale of their miscalculation, it was too late. The Allies had used that invaluable time to secure their beachhead, to build vast supply depots, and to establish an unbreakable foothold on the French coast. The window of opportunity for a decisive German counterattack had slammed shut. By the evening of June 8th, Private McAllister's unit, now tragically reduced to half its original strength, reached a small crossroads near the town of Sainte-Mère-Église. The town was already a legend, one of the first to be liberated by American paratroopers in the opening hours of the invasion. It stood as a symbol of progress amidst the widespread devastation. Burned-out German trucks and armored vehicles littered the streets, silent monuments to the battle that had raged there. Cautiously, French villagers began to emerge from their cellars and hiding places. They waved small, handmade tricolor flags, their faces a mixture of relief, sorrow, and disbelief. An old woman, her face deeply lined with the hardship of occupation, approached McAllister. She pressed a piece of bread into his hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Merci. Merci, Américain," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, American." For the first time since he had stepped off the landing craft into a wall of fire, McAllister allowed himself to smile. It was a small human moment in the midst of a vast mechanical war. Behind him, the engine of that war roared on. Endless convoys of Allied vehicles snaked along the newly made roads. Tanks, trucks, ambulances, fuel carriers, a steel artery pumping life into the invasion. The beaches that had been killing fields just 2 days prior were now a hive of activity, humming with the constant motion of a modern army. They had become lifelines, the vital connection back to England and the free world. Meanwhile, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, had established his headquarters on French soil. He reviewed the incoming reports, each one confirming the staggering success of the operation. The plan had worked. The deception had been flawless, the beachheads had held, and the long-awaited push into France had finally begun. A faint trace of relief crossed his normally stoic face. But Eisenhower was acutely aware of the cost. He knew that this success had been paid for with the lives of thousands of brave men, with tens of thousands more wounded. That night, alone with his thoughts, he wrote quietly in his diary, a testament to the immense weight of his command. "If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." As darkness fell over Normandy once more, the distant thunder of artillery rolled across the fields, a constant grim reminder that the war was far from over. But something had fundamentally changed. For the first time in years, a genuine victory in Western Europe felt not just hopeful, but possible. Exhaustion seeped into every one of McAllister's muscles as he lay in the cool grass beneath the stars, his rifle resting by his side. The road ahead was long and uncertain. But somewhere out there, beyond the darkness and the hedgerows, the road to Paris awaited. Just weeks after the D-Day landings by mid-June 1944, the Allied foothold in Normandy was no longer a fragile beachhead. It had transformed into a powerful, living engine of war. Imagine vast supply lines stretching across the beaches like arteries, pumping life into the front lines. Ammunition, fuel, and food, all in endless quantities. The incredible Mulberry harbors, those giant floating docks built from concrete and steel, were fully operational. Every single day, they allowed the Allies to unload thousands of tons of equipment, turning what was once a desperate gamble into a formidable fortress. While the strategists managed the logistics, the battle for the common soldier raged on inland. For men like Private James McAllister, the war was a grueling, intimate fight through the claustrophobic bocage country of Normandy. These weren't grand, sweeping advances. Victory was measured in yards, not miles. Each field, bordered by thick, ancient hedgerows, was a potential death trap. Every hedge could hide a German machine gun nest or a sniper waiting patiently. To make matters worse, constant rain turned the fields into a thick, clinging mud that slowed every step and drained the soldiers' energy. But despite the mud and the danger, morale was high. The men felt the worst was over. They had survived the beaches. They could survive this. Contrast this with the mood in the German high command, where panic was beginning to take root. The reports from Normandy were catastrophic. Entire divisions were being shattered, supply lines were severed, and communication networks were in total chaos. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, having rushed back to the front, saw the disaster for what it was. He urgently warned his superiors, "We are facing the greatest crisis in the history of the Reich." But his desperate pleas for reinforcements were ignored. Hitler, trapped in his own delusion, remained convinced that the Normandy landings were just a diversion. He believed the real main invasion was still coming at Calais, and stubbornly refused to release his critical panzer reserves until it was far, far too late. Meanwhile, in the quiet backrooms of Allied intelligence, there was a sense of triumph. The master deception, Operation Fortitude, was working even better than they had hoped. Double agents like the legendary Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, were masterfully feeding Berlin a steady diet of convincing lies. They painted a picture of a massive phantom army under General Patton, poised to strike at Calais. German reconnaissance planes, flying over southern England, saw exactly what the Allies wanted them to see: dummy tanks, inflatable landing craft, and fake radio chatter that all confirmed the existence of this fictional invasion force. The longer this elaborate deception held the German 15th Army in place, the more time the Allies had to secure and strengthen their position in Normandy. By the end of June, a significant milestone was reached. All 5 Allied beachheads, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, had been linked into one solid, continuous front. The strategic port city of Cherbourg, after intense and bloody fighting, finally fell. This gave the Allies a deep-water harbor, a vital asset that would dramatically speed up the flow of supplies and reinforcements. While British and Canadian forces were locked in a tenacious battle for the city of Caen, American troops pushed south, grinding their way towards the crucial town of St. Lo. The breakout from the Normandy pocket was no longer a distant dream. It was becoming an imminent reality. For Private McAllister and his unit, now seasoned veterans forged in combat, the landscape of war was changing. They advanced through the French countryside under the constant, reassuring thunder of Allied aircraft dominating the skies. And with their advance came the first taste of liberation for the people of France. Villagers emerged from their homes, waving handmade flags, offering soldiers wine and bread. Children, wide-eyed with excitement, ran alongside the columns of tanks and trucks. You could see the exhaustion on the soldiers' faces, etched with dirt and the profound weight of all they had witnessed. But in their eyes, there was a new light, a flicker of hope. They knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that they were winning. Then, on July 25th, the dam finally broke. The Allies launched Operation Cobra. It began with a cataclysmic aerial bombardment, one of the largest of the war, where thousands of bombers carpeted the German lines in a tight, concentrated area. The ground shook for miles. Immediately following the bombardment, American ground forces surged forward, smashing through the stunned and shattered German defenses. The breakthrough was decisive. The road to Paris was now open, and what was left of the German army in Normandy began a chaotic and desperate retreat. The incredible deception, the immense courage, and the heartbreaking sacrifice of D-Day had finally paid off in full. Imagine Private McAllister standing on a hill overlooking the rolling green fields of Normandy. The air, once thick with the sounds of battle, was now quieter. The faint scent of smoke and salt water mingled with the distant, joyful sound of laughter from a liberated village below. In that moment of quiet reflection, his thoughts turned to the ones who didn't make it. The paratroopers who vanished into the dark skies on June 6th. The infantrymen who fell on the beaches, never to take another step. The medics who died while trying to save others. He closed his eyes, feeling the immense weight of it all. The cost, the sorrow, and the victory. For the first time in years, the tide of the war had definitively turned. The Allies were on the advance, and a suffocated Europe was beginning to breathe again. Many brutal battles still lay ahead. The liberation of Paris, the desperate fight in the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, and the final push to Berlin. But the victory secured in Normandy in June 1944 had already been written into the pages of history. It was a victory born from one of the greatest deceptions ever conceived, and the unbelievable bravery of the men who stormed those beaches. They had opened the door to freedom, and the world would never be the same. Thanks for watching, and if you found this story powerful, please like, share, and subscribe for more chapters from history.